Welcome back. In the dynamic landscape of social entrepreneurship, few leaders stand out as prominently as Elzine Mushambi. With extensive experience in partnerships and transformational projects across Sub-Saharan Africa and Europe, Elzine has established herself as a formidable force in the financial services and oil and gas sectors. As the founder of Impact Tank, Namibia's first social impact venture builder, and Director of EOS Capital, a leading Namibian private equity firm, she is currently attending the World Economic Forum in Davos. This year's agenda at the WEF addresses critical global challenges from pandemic preparedness to energy transitions. In this conversation, we delve into Elzine's experience at the WEF and her thoughts on how collaborative efforts can lead to meaningful change in Namibia and beyond. Elzine, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Daily Roundup.
Thank you so much for having me, and welcome to everyone from a cold and wintry Switzerland.
I was going to ask how Davos is treating you.
It is treating me well, and there's lots of snow and ice on the roads, but that's what matters, right?
Well, Elzine, to start with, just talk to us about what your key takeaways have been from this year's forum.
Right, so a lot has really transpired, and I think the beauty of Davos is it's really the concentrated group of world leaders from public sector and private sector. So it really allows them to sort of mingle and network with what we call the world's best. Three key takeaways. I think the first is this geopolitical fragmentation that we're seeing currently. These three superpowers that are emerging alongside Africa, which very much is the US with the new election. We've got what Europe is going to do over the next 2 to 3 years. And then, of course, China and the East. So, and of course, geopolitical fragmentation really sort of impacts trade and growth and sort of how the global economy is going to maneuver itself in the next 3 to 5 years. I think the next thing is very much sort of looking at regulation and deregulation. Are we going to see more bureaucracies coming through, or are we going to see less regulation, especially in the fintech space? The third key takeaway that we're seeing is very much in the AI and technology phase. So what are the implications of AI for the world? And then, of course, linked to that, cybersecurity and cybercrime. So that's very much, I think, what the agenda is talking about. I think as a tacit variable, it's saying, collaboration and the world really just needs to move together in what we're all trying to do.
Yeah. How does EOS Capital's mission align with the themes discussed at the WEF this year, particularly in relation to social impact and, of course, sustainability?
Right. So EOS Capital is a Namibian private equity fund and, managing currently 3 funds. I think one is sort of our infrastructure fund. The second is a generalist PE fund, which deployed capital in a lot of manufacturing businesses in Namibia. And then, of course, we've got an agricultural fund, which is currently still the only and largest agri fund in the country. So when we're looking at its alignment with sort of the WEF mandate, we're looking at, especially under the infrastructure pillar of EOS Capital. And I think one of the thematic trends that I spoke about was the world of AI, digitalization, and technology. And so EOS is very much aligning itself to deploy capital into infrastructure, specifically in the ICT space. One of the EOS assets are linked to fiber connectivity across the country, where we've really invested into hundreds of kilometers of fiber within the country, which is very much allowing for connectivity in rural areas, supporting and enabling the existing Namibian telcos. Of course, when we're looking at geopolitical fragmentation and sort of the impact of trade, specifically with our agricultural fund called Euphrates, EOS has some amazing agricultural assets. One sort of being in the irrigation space, allowing for Namibian farmers to receive the very best of products under the agro-processing line. We've also seen that we've got a project or a venture company called Kadila, which I hope you're in the stores buying Kadila poultry, because that is a proudly Namibian-owned chicken manufacturing entity. And so for us, it's very much alignment to sort of global trends and market trends. I mean, we do take Namibian pension fund allocations, and we're custodians and ethical custodians and stewards that pension fund money to ensure that we get the necessary returns ultimately for the Namibian people. And us just being at WEF and being visible in these rooms is very much allowing for this sort of African European crossover, so that we're not just only consumers of what Europe and the US provide, but we're actually having a seat at the table.
That's fantastic. Well, of course, we know that the World Economic Forum, as you mentioned earlier, is this platform where global leaders in different sectors come together to discuss these pertinent issues. I know that, of course, no policies are sort of enacted or undertaken at the forum, but it's a platform that really gives opportunity for collaboration and partnership. So could you share some examples of partnerships that have developed from your participation in forums such as Davos, and explain how they've influenced your work in Namibia?
Yes, of course. So I think Davos very much is what people are starting to call sort of pen to paper, right? And we're seeing a lot of MOUs being signed between national governments, between private sector, and of course alliances being built. But specifically in the EOS space, I think as we're using this as a strategic sort of conference in which to attract investors into Namibia, but ultimately to allow us to fundraise. So we're in the midst of a large fundraising round in the infrastructure space. And this infrastructure is very much to get Namibia ready for in all of our energy assets. Yeah. And Nina, I think the biggest thing right now that the world is talking about is the green hydrogen in Namibia, as well as the recent oil finds, waiting for those oil companies to ultimately provide us their sort of appraisal decisions going forward. Yeah. For us, we're here to investment into Namibia and specifically into our fund so that we can ultimately build the necessary infrastructure that we know the economy so desperately requires.
Indeed. Given the pressing global issues addressed at the WEF, what strategies, Elzine, do you believe are essential for tackling unemployment and economic disparity in our country?
I think we're very much needing to look at it from a collaborative perspective where private sector and government come together to really build large-scale employment initiatives, whether they be in the agricultural space, whether they be in sort of our mineral processing areas, or in sort of digitization. I don't believe that government can and should shoulder the wheel alone. We've got a thriving sort of private sector economy that can shoulder the wheel with us, but it's very much this collaborative effort between public and private sector that I believe, should be shouldering the wheel of our large sort of unemployment rates currently.
As you alluded to just a few seconds ago, the topic of energy transitions is also being discussed at this year's forum. So is there anything related to the subject that particularly piqued your interest, and if so, why?
Yes, I mean, I was looking at the stat that really just frightened me, Nina. It was saying that Africa generates 2% of the world's electricity, but has 18% of the world's population. And, when we look at that currently on our continent, we have 600 million people without electricity, 420 million without water. So for us, energy generation is sort of critical, I think, for every African government. Also, given the sort of the resources available to us, right? I think in Namibia, we've got the best wind and the best solar capacities and capabilities. So for us, it's how can we actually capitalize on that and potentially start feeding the Southern African power pool as well. So I think Africa needs to start generating more energy. But of course, for the generation of energy, if we want to put up large wind farms or put up large solar farms, we need infrastructure financing. And that's really the gap that EOS is trying to fill for the country.
Talk to us about, emerging trends in impact investing. What do you foresee shaping the future around this, specifically in social entrepreneurship when it comes to Sub-Saharan Africa?
I'm definitely seeing sort of, I think, I sound like a broken record, but element of digitization is going to be critical. And the reason I say that is because digital provides the ability for a country to leapfrog parts of its sort of industrial revolutions, right? We're seeing a component of perhaps in some of the continent, or specifically in Namibia, where there aren't enough hospitals. But now we're looking at an area where perhaps we don't need to build hospitals, but we need to provide access to primary healthcare. And the way that we can do that is perhaps through telemedicine or, health technologies that allow sort of us to not require the physical infrastructure assets, but still provide the accessibility to specific critical needs that we as people have. So of course, technology is a key trend. So we're going to see an uptick in investment for that. I think what we're also going to see is sort of a large deployment of capital into impact. And I think the question is it really impact investing when it is in Africa? Because that's very much what's already been done. I think if we just go down to the granularity of what impact investing is, it's very much providing money into vehicles that change lives. So you and I know that there are informal ways that this has been happening in Africa or Namibia through stokvels and, the monthly savings clubs. That's really a form of impact, investing and deployment of capital. It's now just aligning it to that terminology ultimately.
Just finally, Elzine, as a leader yourself, what key lessons have you learned from your experience, at Davos and other international conferences that you apply to your work?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much that we all need to work together, right? I mean, there's nobody smart enough in the room to be in the room alone, and things ultimately won't get done. So for me, collaboration is key, and just the openness to innovation, because we're seeing sort of sustained growth in economies that continue to innovate. And so for me, that innovation component and collaborating with people that perhaps can do things better or have technologies that are better ultimately is going to allow for sustained growth.
Well, Madam Mushambi, on that note, thank you so much for your time this evening. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Cheers.
When we come back after this brief break, we delve into health matters. So do stay with us here on the Daily Roundup with Nina.